In the humid, rain-soaked landscape of Southeast Asia during the late 1960s and early 1970s, a unique and largely undocumented military phenomenon began to unfold. It was a meeting of two different worlds, a collision of two distinct philosophies of shadow warfare that would redefine the limits of human endurance and tactical precision. On one side of this invisible front line stood the United States Navy SEALs, legends in the making, forged in the salt water of the Pacific and tempered by the brutal direct fire of the Mekong Delta. On the other side were the men of the Australian Special Air Service, the SAS, quiet, lean, and terrifyingly patient professionals who had mastered the art of jungle survival and deep reconnaissance long before the first American combat boots touched the red, iron-rich mud of Saigon. To understand the gravity of their joint operations and the profound cultural exchange that occurred, one must first recognize the fundamental essence of the Navy SEALs during this chaotic era of warfare. They were the frogmen, the direct tactical descendants of the underwater demolition teams that had cleared the beaches of the Pacific during the Second World War. Their entire military doctrine was built on the fundamental pillars of speed, raw aggression, and overwhelming violence of action. In the labyrinthine, brackish waterways of the Mekong Delta, the SEALs were the undisputed kings of the night. They moved in fire teams of 6 to 8 men, utilizing the winding rivers as high-speed avenues for insertion and extraction. Their method was the surgical strike: hit hard, hit fast, and vanish back into the black water before the enemy could even chamber around in response. They used noise and fear as psychological tools, punctuated by the roar of suppressed weapons and the sudden violent detonation of claymore mines. To a SEAL, the objective was the mission, and the mission was a violent rupture in the enemy's sense of physical and psychological security. They were hunters who preferred the sprint to the marathon. However, as the strategic focus of the war drifted away from the riverbanks and deeper into the triple canopy highlands and the dense, suffocating forests of the long, high hills, the SEALs encountered a different kind of reality. They found themselves operating alongside a unit that viewed the jungle not as an obstacle to be overcome by speed and technology, but as a sanctuary to be inhabited with absolute monastic silence. The Australian SAS did not inherit their tactics from the sea. Their lineage stretched back to the long-range desert patrols of North Africa and the brutal, grinding counterinsurgency campaigns in the humid green hells of Malaya and Borneo. These men did not merely pass through the terrain, they melted into it until they became indistinguishable from the shadows. To the Australians, silence was not merely a tactical advantage, it was a sacred duty, a way of life, and the fundamental law of their survival in a land that wanted them dead. The differences between these two elite forces were immediate and, at times, jarring to the high-energy American operators. While a SEAL fire team might carry a heavy load of specialized gear, including M60 machine guns, various short-barreled CAR-15 rifles, and a multitude of fragmentation and white phosphorus grenades, the SAS patrol, rarely exceeding 5 men, stripped their equipment to the absolute bare essentials. They carried the L1A1, or the heavily modified bitch rifles, which were cut-down versions of the standard SLR, favoring the heavy 7.62mm stopping power over the lighter 5.56 rounds of the American M16. They often completed entire week-long patrols through the most dangerous territory in the world without ever firing a single shot, returning to base with intelligence that was far more valuable than a pile of enemy bodies. The first recorded joint patrols in 1969 served as a profound classroom for both sides, a place where egos were set aside in favor of survival. One American team leader recalled his first night in a shared perimeter with the Australians in the dense, light-starved forests of Phuoc Tuy. Standard American procedure dictated a strict watch rotation, with at least 1 or 2 men awake and alert at all times, eyes straining against the dark. But the SAS did not follow a formal rotation in the way Americans understood it. They all simply lay there, motionless, for hours on end. When the American officer, confused by the total lack of visible movement, asked who was currently on sentry duty, the Australian patrol commander replied in a dry, rasping whisper that they all were. They didn't sleep in the way conventional soldiers did. They listened. Their security was not found in a man standing guard, but in a collective sensory immersion in the forest, where every snap of a twig or shift in the wind was interpreted by 5 sets of highly trained ears simultaneously. For the SEALs, who were already masters of maritime stealth, the Australian approach to movement was a revelation that challenged their very core and their understanding of time itself. Where an American team might cover a kilometer in an hour, a pace that was considered elite and stealthy for most reconnaissance units, the SAS might take 60 minutes to cover only 10 or 20 meters. At first, the SEALs found this maddeningly slow. It felt cautious to the point of being inhuman, almost stagnant, like watching grass grow. But as they watched the Australians glide over dry leaf litter without making a single audible sound, stepping between twigs as if they had memorized the position of every fallen branch on the forest floor, frustration turned into deep, abiding fascination. The SAS taught the cells the art of reading the __0_ of the jungle. They learned to spot foliage that had been bent in the wrong direction by a passing rucksack, or a shadow that didn't belong to the natural, the chaotic geometry of the trees. They taught the Americans that the most important thing in the jungle is not what you see, but what is missing from the natural order. This was the philosophy of non-existence. If a bird stopped its song, if a cricket went silent, if the wind shifted the smell of wood smoke from a distant camp, the SAS didn't just stop, they became part of the root system of the trees themselves. They practiced, quote, avoiding soap, tobacco, and even certain foods that would give away their position to a keen-nosed enemy scout. Stillness was the second great lesson, and perhaps the hardest for the aggressive, action-oriented Americans to master. During one joint operation overlooking a suspected Viet Cong logistics trail in the Iron Triangle, the combined team sat in a hidden observation post. For 8 long, agonizing hours, not a single Australian moved a single muscle. They didn't scratch an itch, they didn't shift their weight to relieve a cramped leg, and they didn't adjust their gear to alleviate the biting pressure of their packs. They became living statues made of red mud and mottled camouflage. Just before the arrival of the morning light, the reward for this incredible patience appeared. A column of North Vietnamese soldiers marched directly into the kill zone, completely unaware that they were being watched by the deadliest men on Earth from only 15 feet away. When a SEAL later whispered, asking how the Australian had known the enemy was coming long before they were visible to the eye, the reply was as simple as it was profound. Because the jungle went quiet before they appeared. We didn't wait for the enemy, we waited for the jungle to tell us they were coming. While the SEALs were absorbing these monastic habits of disappearance, the Australians were also observing their American counterparts with a quiet, professional respect that they rarely showed to any other unit. The SAS realized that while they could sit still longer than any human on Earth, the SELs could pack, move, and redeploy with a speed and ferocity that was almost supernatural when a situation turned hot. The Americans were warrior engineers, constantly modifying their gear, jury-rigging strobe lights onto their compasses for night navigation, and creating modular webbing systems that allowed for incredible flexibility in the heat of a firefight. The Australians, who traditionally relied on standard-issue gear and old-fashioned habits of the bush, began to adopt the American habit of tinkering to gain a tactical edge. Moreover, the SEALs' command of waterborne operations brought an entirely new dimension to the SAS playbook. The ability to infiltrate a target area from a river at night using silent paddles and specialized diving equipment, strike with surgical precision, and be gone before the jungle registered the event was a skill set the Australians had not fully refined for the specific, muddy conditions of the Delta. By watching the SEALs maneuver their riverboats and silent inflatable craft, the SAS integrated maritime mobility into their own deep reconnaissance missions. It was a trade of ancient and modern skills. The Australians gave the SEALs the secrets of the _quote _4_, and the SEALs gave the Australians the mastery of the _quote _5_. One of the most significant tactical exchanges occurred during a mission in the Phuoc Tuy province in late 1970. The mission was a high-stakes ambush of a major Viet Cong supply trail that fed the strongholds in the mountains. The SAS had inserted 24 hours early, vanishing into the elevated slopes above the trail under the cover of a torrential monsoon. When the SEAL team arrived the following morning, pushing through the thick undergrowth, they couldn't find a single trace of their allies until a prearranged signal, a soft, bird-like whistle, was given, and the Australians literally rose from the earth like phantoms made of leaves and dirt. During the ambush, the tension was so thick it felt as though the air itself had weight. A small group of enemy scouts appeared first, moving cautiously through the mud, their eyes scanning the tree line. The SEALs, trained for rapid engagement and immediate dominance, were ready to open fire the moment the targets entered the kill zone. But the SAS corporal held them back with a single silent gesture of his hand. He knew, through a level of intuition that the Americans were still learning, that these were merely forward observers meant to bait a response. They waited another 45 minutes in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone and shivering, until the main column, 30 or 40 men strong, entered the center of the trap. When the signal finally came, it wasn't a shout or a whistle. It was the soft, mechanical click of a safety being moved to the fire position. In 7 seconds of controlled, devastating fire, the column was shattered. The jungle swallowed the echoes of the gunfire almost as quickly as the teams initiated their pre-planned withdrawal routes. Afterward, the contrast remained as sharp as the edge of a combat knife. The SEALs were buzzing with the adrenaline of the successful engagement, discussing the technicalities of the shots and the movement of the enemy. The Australians, however, were already resetting their gear in total, focused silence, their faces as calm and impassive as if they were back at their base in Nui Dat. As one Australian trooper famously remarked to a whispering American, "You move like it is a war. We move like it is already over." This phrase became a mantra for the SEALs who served with them, a reminder that the ultimate goal was not the fight itself, but the result. By the middle of 1971, this tactical cross-pollination was in full swing across the entire theater of operations. SEALs in the Delta were requesting specific training with SAS patrols to understand bush hygiene, learning how to bury even their own saliva, how to mask the scent of their rations, and how to wrap every metal buckle and zipper in tape to prevent the slightest clink of equipment against a weapon. In turn, SAS teams began using smaller, more reliable American PRC-77 radios and experimenting with SEAL drops, fast recon insertions where speed was prioritized over total invisibility for specific time-sensitive targets. They began to use each other's language and adopt each other's lore. Australians started referring to rapid, high-impact recon as SEAL work, while Americans began calling long-duration passive observation ghosting, a direct nod to the Australian way of simply existing without being present. It was an evolution born in the crucible of the monsoon rains and the red, clinging mud of the Vietnamese interior. The SEALs didn't stop being SEALs, and the SAS didn't stop being SAS, but they both returned from these shared missions more aware of the limitations of their own national doctrines. When the conflict finally drew to a close and both units packed their gear for the last time, they left behind a legacy that would shape the future of special operations for the next 50 years. The lessons of Vietnam, carved into muscle memory during those long, silent hours under the green canopy, never left them. Many of those SEALs went on to command the next generation of operators in SEAL Team 6, passing down the Australian way of extreme patience and environmental integration as a core requirement for modern special warfare. Many SAS veterans took the American strike fast and tinker mentality into future conflicts in places like East Timor, Afghanistan, and Iraq. where the ability to transition from a ghost to a hammer was the difference between victory and death. Today, when military historians discuss the elite units of the Vietnam War, they often speak of them in isolation, as if they operated in separate, parallel universes. They talk about the legendary riverine raids of the SEALs or the incredible tracking skills of the SAS. But the most fascinating and human story is found in the overlap, the humid, deadly space where the shadow of the American Navy met the ghost of the Australian Army. It was a brotherhood formed not of nation, flag, or rank, but of a shared, silent mindset that transcended the politics of the era. Every time a modern special operator in the 21st century holds their breath, waits 10 minutes longer than feels comfortable, and strikes only when the timing is absolutely perfect, they are channeling the spirits of those men from the late 60s. They are proof that while there are many ways to disappear, the ultimate form of survival is found in the balance between the roar of the sea and the silence of the trees. The jungle never gave second chances, but it did give these two forces a chance to see that even the best in the world still have something to learn from the man lying perfectly still in the mud right next to them. This was the true meaning of the joint patrol. The realization that to master the war, one must first master oneself, and that silence is often the loudest and most terrifying weapon on the battlefield. As we look back at the records of these joint operations, we see more than just tactical reports. We see a philosophy of warfare that emphasizes the human element over the machine. The Australian SAS and the Navy SEALs proved that despite differences in training and equipment, the core of elite performance is the same: discipline, humility, and the willingness to learn from a peer. Their shared history remains a cornerstone of the special relationship between their two nations, a bond forged in the deepest, darkest parts of the Vietnamese jungle, where the only things that mattered were the man to your left, the man to your right, and the absolute silence of the world around you. The story of the Phantoms and the Frogmen is not just a story of war, but a story of the evolution of the warrior spirit. It reminds us that even in the most violent of times, there is a place for quiet mastery and for the respect that one professional holds for another. The jungle may have reclaimed the trails they walked and the bunkers they inhabited, but the lessons they learned from each other continue to echo through the training grounds of Coronado and Swanbourne, ensuring that the art of the ghost and the strike of the shadow will never be forgotten. Each generation of operators who learns to think like the terrain or to hit with the force of the tide owes a debt to that brief, intense period of history when the two most elite forces on Earth looked at each other and said, "Show me how you disappear."